There's no question that Jon Moxley is one of the most successful and important wrestlers in the world today. He was already a major name thanks to his run in the WWE, but ever since leaving, he's elevated himself into a different league of talent, as he's been able to work in a variety of major promotions all across the world. Now, I imagine most of you out there are familiar with his time in the WWE. The Shield, the title matches, the hot dog cart, all that. So I wanted to dig a little deeper and take a look at Jon Moxley's career before the WWE. To do that, I went back and watched 65 matches from Moxley's time on the Indies before signing with the WWE, as well as a bunch of his promos. Today, we're going to take a close and critical look at Jon Moxley, a sick guy.
I just like to feel I like to drive really fast. I like it when I feel blood pouring out of my head and I hear it hit the canvas with that little sound the blood makes when it hits the canvas. I like to feel my fingernails and this thing here digging into the forehead of somebody else. I like to feel when it hurts a little bit because I like to feel alive. I like to go to bars and bang really ugly girls. I'm just a sick guy. I'm really a dirty guy.
How much more difficult is it? Three competitors in a match instead of just...
I don't know how to do a handle out real well, and I can't backflip, but I have, they call it corn kid street fighting. I fought for the belt tonight, just like I fight for every meal of my entire life. And it got stolen from me, just like a lot of meals have, by big, scary dogs. Why do you keep watching me? Why does everybody talk to me all the time? Why can't you just leave me alone? I'm not doing anything.
Jon Moxley spends most of his early years as a wrestler with Heartland Wrestling Association, a small independent promotion run by Les Thatcher. Les helped train Moxley and break him into the business, so it's only natural that Mox would cut his teeth in this promotion. Now, here's the most important thing to note about these early matches from Mox. They're not great. Honestly, I struggle to even call most of them good. The first few matches I saw were a pair of them against Nigel McGuinness in 2005 and 2006. Nigel was also trained by Les Thatcher, so he's a notable alumnus of HWA. In these matches, he's essentially giving the new kid on the block in HWA a chance to get some shine, as Nigel's own profile was beginning to soar through his work with ROH. The thing is, Mox is just absolutely nowhere even close to where Nigel was in 2005 and 2006. Probably the best match in this time period is against Pepper Parks, who you may know as The Blade in AEW. Also a Les Thatcher trainee and working in HWA, they have a really fun match in 2006 that moves at a good pace and never goes beyond what it should be. It's a fun TV championship match, and it's really good stuff. Mox is even able to work with a handful of interesting and exciting opponents in these first few years of his career. Many of them were capable and even great workers at the time, but good is about the best we get from these matches. Perhaps the best example of this is Chris Hero having a good match with Mox on a 2008 HWA show. Nothing worth going out of your way for, but it's a good match. Perhaps the most damning statement about where Mox was in the industry at this time is that when paired with Bryan Danielson in 2007, the match was perfectly fine at best. Not even in a charming house show way, it's just kind of there. Bryan goes through the motions and the match doesn't leave any impression. Now, it's important to note that there's more factors than just Mox's own ability at play here. HWA isn't exactly a booming territory in the 2000s, regardless of its notable alumni. It's not some super indie, it's just a small regional promotion getting Les Thatcher's guys a place to wrestle. That being said, even when they do bring in hot indie guys of the time, like a Hero or a Nigel, there's no real impetus on those guys to give their 100%. So, not only is Mox not quite the fully formed worker he would eventually be, but he's also not given the best material to work with. As a whole, there's not much special in this time period for Mox, and there's not really anything I can actively recommend to you guys. Luckily, things would only improve for Mox at around 2008. Then he comes across an opponent with the kind of energy and presence needed to elevate Mox's work to all new heights. In a 2014 episode of The Art of Wrestling, Mox talks a lot about a certain point in his independent career when he felt that he had hit a bit of a ceiling in terms of the things he had accomplished.
I went up and down. I had highs and lows like everybody. For me, it was like when I first started, it was like, okay, go, get to WWE and make $1 billion as fast as possible. And I caught him pretty well, pretty fast, and got pretty good pretty fast, not to be arrogant, at least what I consider good. And
for you early on your career, you mean?
Yeah, I think I picked up on it pretty well. And I ended up when I was 20, I ended up in Puerto Rico, like full-time down there. And when I came back from there, everybody's got their ups and downs, you know, they get fucking, chemically imbalanced and shit. And there was, for a minute, I tried to quit. I was like, fuck this isn't going anywhere, like, yeah, but you know how you get, so for somewhere around there, I got like really like, fuck this, and I like tried to quit for like 6 months, even though I was like just not really quitting, I was just like, I was just being like a little bitch.
And what was your game plan?
And
school, work?
No, I didn't have one. I was just like, fuck this, I'm telling you, because you get to the point where you think you're really good, and you're not getting any recognition for it, and you can't fucking get fucking booked anywhere, and you're like, god damn it, and you can't get a fucking tryout here, or whatever the fuck, and you're like, fuck this, whatever. Indie wrestling sucks, fuck it.
It's around 2008 where I feel like a switch flips for Moxley. And the thing that seems to help him do it is finding an opponent who he has excellent chemistry with. Someone that could really push him to up his game, and even open some doors for him on the independent scene. So, let's get it out of the way. Drake Younger's a nut, his political beliefs are horrific. If he somehow runs for office of anything, you probably shouldn't vote for him. Alright, now that we've got that out of the way, we can talk about the fact that once Moxley started his rivalry with Drake Younger around 2008, it was easily his best in-ring work in his career to that point. These two wrestle a lot, and I mean a lot, in 2008 and 2009, and even more beyond that. Their first notable interactions with each other are in IPW, a small independent promotion based in Indianapolis. The matches are contested for the IPW Championship, and they're really quite good. In fact, while their rivalry would branch out into a lot of the more hardcore fare that Mox would become known for eventually, it's their standard singles matches that stood out best to me personally. Drake is just such an explosive and quick wrestler at this point in his career that Mox kind of has no choice but to up his game or get left behind. Luckily, it feels like he definitely does meet the challenge, and the rivalry with Drake Younger makes up a good amount of his best remembered matches from the independent scene. The feud with Younger in IPW also gave Mox the platform to experiment with his characters and promos a bit more. In fact, it's during this run that he's able to cut some of the most iconic promos of his career, promos that I genuinely believe played a huge part in catapulting him to the success that he is today.
What are you saying to me? What do you want from me? Can you not see that I'm getting ready for my match? Can you not see that I'm getting ready for my match? I'm gonna beat Drake Younger. Wait, did it already happened? He beat me already. Hey, what's your name? You smell like the inside of my mom's purse. I kind of like it. I don't know how to do a hammerlock real well, and I can't backflip, but they call it poor kid street fighting. I fought for the belt tonight just like I fight for every meal of my entire life. And it got stolen from me, just like a lot of meals have, by big, scary dogs. Hey, come back here. I felt alive. The adrenaline pumps really high, and the crowd's really loud, and there's a lot on the line. I know these pretty girls are watching us, and some ugly ones too. And I like to feel alive. I don't even mind that I got cut in the head. I don't mind that I cut Drake Younger's head, because I just like to feel really alive. I like to drive really fast. I like it when I feel blood pouring out of my head, and I hear it hit the canvas with that little sound the blood makes when it hits the canvas. I like to feel my fingernails and this thing here digging into the forehead of somebody else. I like to feel when it hurts a little bit, because I like to feel alive. I like to go to bars and bang really ugly girls. I'm just a sick guy. I'm really a dirty guy, but because I really love feeling alive. This is a world championship. This is something that athletes sacrifice their entire lives, their families, their jobs, their whole lives, they sacrifice to achieve things like this. They bleed, they sweat, they cry to achieve things like I did tonight. But it's just a possession. It's just a possession. I'm not really a possession guy. I'm kind of a mean potatoes kind of guy. This really means shit to me. That possessions just make you a target. And I don't want to be a target. I fashion myself more as a hunter. I don't want to be a target. So if I have this possession, people are going to come after me to try and get it. So I don't want it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this belt here. Fuck this. I'm gonna shrink it down to a vapor. And it's gonna pass through my skin, into my pores, into my blood cells. And it's gonna become a part of my body. It's gonna become a part of me. This belt, from this moment on, is gonna pump along with my heart, my blood. Every breath that I take with my lungs will be taken along with this belt. And this belt is going to be damned right alongside my soul for all the sins I've yet to commit. And then nobody can take it from me, because it's a part of me.
A lot of the more famous aspects of Mox's character come out in these particular promos. The unpredictable wildness, the psychotic swagger, hell, even the almost violent manhandling of women. The vivid imagery in his word choice never comes across as fake or phony. Despite the heightened nature of it all, it certainly feels real and authentic. It all works together to paint a picture of an unhinged, dangerous man that could do some very real damage. It felt real, and it did a lot to bolster Mox's value on the indies. As much improvement as Mox was starting to show with his renewed character and his revitalized energy in the ring, it definitely did still feel like IPW was more a place for experimentation than anything else. The company's smaller profile and more intimate crowd meant that Mox and Drake's matches were mostly just fun crowd pleasers. This is especially noticeable when they're working gimmick matches. There's a sense of them just riffing instead of actually doing some next-level violence to each other. For that, they had to take the feud elsewhere. That brings us to Moxley's time in CZW, the company where he did his most high-profile independent wrestling work. Coming to CZW really opened a lot of doors for Moxley, and it saw him achieve his greatest successes on the independent scene. It's here that his tag team with Sami Callihan, the Switchblade Conspiracy, found a lot of prominence. He continues his feud with Drake Younger here, as well as Drake's Naptown Dragons tag partner, Scotty Vortex. It's bringing the feud to CZW, where Drake is in the middle of a monstrously long run as the world champion that allows Mox to have what I would deem his first truly great match. The Tangled Web death match between the Switchblade Conspiracy and the Naptown Dragons is the best match in Mox's career up to that point. It's a real simple formula of the heels in Mox and Callahan being punished by the babyfaces by being tossed into barbed wire contraptions. The entire match moves at a quick and frantic pace, with all the bumps and gimmick spots looking painful and spectacular. It's a truly great deathmatch, and Mox is a great part of it, although he's still somewhat overshadowed by his partner Sami Callihan in the ring. Funnily enough though, the best Mox-Drake singles match doesn't even happen in CZW, but rather in WXW in Germany. It's here on January 17th, 2010 that they have an excellent no-ropes barbed wire match. Much like the Tangled Web match, this one is about how these two work towards and pay off big spots with all the sharp objects in their midst. They really do their best to maximize the gimmick, bumping into and on the barbed wire for pretty much the entire match. It's around this time that Mox also starts tightening up his offensive strikes as well. While Mox has gone on record about admiring and preferring to nail worked punches and strikes, it's when he's able to let loose with a few stiffer shots that he's really able to shine in the ring. It just adds a much more grounded and gritty dimension to the already over-the-top and insane violence that he was partaking in. At the end of 2009, Moxley wins a really fun 4-way #1 contendership match that puts him next in line for the CZW World Heavyweight Championship. Probably my favorite thing in this match is that Mox gets the win with a roll-up on Eddie Kingston. It's a small thing, but it's a move he'd return to throughout the year, which distinguishes that he has more than just his typical finisher and ultra-violent action to get the victory. He'd finally get his shot at the 11th anniversary show of CZW against B-Boy, who had just won the title a couple of weeks before.
You know what's kind of funny? They're gonna call it an upset. Have a good time tonight. It's your 15 minutes.
The match is a great classic story of a veteran champion having to defend against a cocky young up-and-comer. There's a really strong structural idea here of B-Boy sustaining a bad arm injury about halfway through the match, and it's that injury that kills his momentum and allows Mox to get the victory and the title. Now crowned a world champion in one of the most recognizable indie promotions in the country, Mox would go on an absolute tear in 2010 in what would become easily his best in-ring year to that point. The amount of bangers Mox is able to have in 2010 is truly impressive. He has a series of strong tag matches alongside Sami for WXW, the best one being an incredibly compact and exciting match against the Young Bucks during 16 Carat Weekend. In general, it's not crazy to state that Sami still probably feels like a more polished in-ring worker at this point, but Mox is just fully upping his game to match his partner. While one could debate about who the better worker in the team is, what's become clear is that Mox no longer feels like the definite lesser performer. 2010 and the CZW World title run is filled to bursting with gems big and small from Moxley. March 13th is an especially notable date. In the afternoon, Mox has his first singles match against Nick Gage for the title, and it's a wonderful, brutal deathmatch spot show. What makes this day even more impressive, however, is that later in the evening, Mox and Callahan are able to put on a more traditionally indie-style tag match against the American Wolves without any of the hardcore gimmicks in it. It's a strong case builder for the kind of versatility that Moxley was able to display at his peak, all within the same day. Perhaps Moxley's best title defense in his entire reign is on April 10th against his tag partner Sami Callihan. It's exactly the kind of hard-hitting smackfest of a championship match that I love. The added personal history of these two being former partners means that there's a little bit more malice behind all those strikes. There's a great sense of the two trying to outdo each other without ever devolving into melodrama. It's violent without having to lean on gimmicks. The tail end of Moxley's title reign is marked by his feud with both Nick Gage and Egotistico Fantastico, who would later unmask and be known as Robert Anthony. They had a pair of three-ways in July and August that are really fun brawls that keep a quick pace, and I don't think Mox was ever able to replicate that same energy with either man in subsequent singles matches. There is another three-way match of note, though, from CZW Southern Violence, this time against Nick Gage and Drake Younger. Despite being played to a smaller, newer market for CZW, this might be one of the funnest death matches of the whole year, and easily one of Mox's best matches to that point. The violence is wild and frenzied, but always with a certain sense of joyousness and even silliness that elevates the action instead of undercuts it. This one's actually free to watch on YouTube, so I highly recommend going out of your way to see it. Unfortunately for Mox, his time with the title does fizzle out. He's mentioned in previous interviews that the end of his independent run was marred by a sense that he'd accomplished all that he could, as well as a growing cynicism with what he termed as a smarky attitude that pervaded locker rooms that he was in.
Toward my end of my run on the indies, I was kind of done and just kind of like, you were over it. Really, yeah, I just didn't give a fuck anymore. It's like somewhere along the line in indie wrestling, the marks, everybody's a super internet mark. The wrestlers, the refs, the promoters, everybody. Nobody's it seemed like everybody was just a goddamn mark.
His lack of motivation does come across towards the end of this run, as nothing in the last couple of months of his time in CZW really stands out as anything special. There's a really bad title defense against Brody Lee that isn't helped by being played to one of CZW's most detached and snarky crowds at the time. It's not that the work is awful, but there's a certain panicked and almost spiteful nature to it, with the two guys having an uphill climb against a very harsh crowd. Mox's final days with the title are further hurt by him dropping the title to Robert Anthony, someone who feels like he was dreadfully mishandled in his time chasing the belt. The final match that Mox has for the CZW World title is pretty good, but it definitely feels like Mox's time with it ends much more with a whimper than a bang. Before we continue, I just want to touch briefly on Mox's time in IWA Mid-South. To sum up, it's nothing special. This is long after IWA Mid-South's peak, and it's really not much more than a small territory for Mox to dip into to get some bookings and maybe work on some material for other, bigger promotions. There is one match, however, that is absolutely worth seeking out that I wanted to talk about. It comes in the opening round of the 2010 Prince of the Deathmatches tournament. Mox's opponent is Neil Diamond Cutter, a much smaller man that's a key part of the IWA Mid-South roster at the time. Mox comes out from the curtain and demands that instead of his usual theme music, the sound guy play Sweet Caroline instead, and well, Mox is just unleashed here.
Touch your hand! I'm reaching out! I'm touching me! Touching you! Sweet Caroline! Good time!
It's such an iconic moment in Mox's indie run that him singing Sweet Caroline is actually the official thumbnail for this event on the IWTV stream. But as wonderful and memeable as that particular moment is, the match that follows is actually really good too. It's a Whiskey Shots Taipei death match, which means there's a bunch of broken glass involved, and every few minutes, both competitors have to take a shot of whiskey. The way it plays out is really clever. Mox, thinking himself a hard ass, takes the whiskey every time, while Cutler sneakily pours his drinks out like Ric Flair at an after party. From there, the story is simple. Mox gets progressively drunk, which allows the smaller but sober Cutler to capitalize. I don't know, I just really loved the simplicity of the idea and the commitment both guys had to it. It absolutely rules. To me, this demonstrates that Moxley's often wild and unpredictable persona had a more comedic side to it than one might have initially imagined. Just another feather in his cap as an extremely compelling and versatile performer. 2010 also saw Mox begin accepting bookings for the two prominent indie companies under the control of Gabe Sapolsky at the time, Dragon Gate USA and Evolve. To be perfectly honest, it's not the most natural fit for Mox. DG USA is populated by the high-speed and high-flying workers from Japan, while Evolve was meant to be a bigger attempt at portraying pro wrestling as sport, where Mox's bread and butter was wild brawls and gimmick matches. It's very much a square peg and a round hole situation here, but Mox is still able to do some really strong work with the opportunity. And Mox would tell you the same. He's gone on record about feeling like he didn't quite belong in these promotions, but the opportunity to work for Sapolsky, who had helped provide a platform to so many indie wrestlers at that point, was simply too good to pass up. While Moxley's Evolve run is pretty uninteresting on the whole, there's a couple of feuds from DG USA that are definitely worth mentioning. First of all is Moxley's feud with Bryan Danielson. This feud started during Bryan's summer vacation after getting fired from the WWE for choking Justin Roberts with a tie. Bryan dipped into both Evolve and DG USA, so it makes sense that he'd take on a rising indie star like Jon Moxley while he was there. Of course, Moxley would call out Bryan in a series of promos both on the shows and posted online.
What I want is Bryan Danielson's head on a stick! When the night comes to a close on September 26th, you're going to have to ask yourself, am I the best wrestler in the world? I'm not going to tell you that you're not. I'm going to let you ask yourself that question at the end of the night. And only me and you are going to know the answer. You can have King of the Independents. Take it. So I want something more. I want something that's just between me and you.
The two would be set to finally face each other for Dragon Gate USA at Way of the Ronin on September 26th, 2010. At the time, Bryan had actually already re-signed and returned to the WWE. In fact, at the point that they wrestled in their singles match, Bryan was already the WWE United States Champion, so it was already kind of clear what the result would be, but a major opportunity for Moxley nonetheless. The match is really great, one of Moxley's best from his Dragon Gate USA run. Of course, a lot of that has to do with being in there with literally the greatest wrestler ever, but Moxley had really improved to the point where he could be a believable threat. He didn't look lost out there and was even able to up the physicality in the ring to match Bryan's own. As great as that match was, they also have what appears to be a simple dry run on an HWA show just the month before. It's not nearly as good, but it's actually pretty strong in its own right. It's a much more straightforward match, but contrasted with Moxley's match against Bryan in 2007, and the leap in quality is huge. I feel like these matches in particular are some of the ones that most clearly illustrate the exponential improvement that Mox made in such a short amount of time. If we're talking about the very best stuff from Moxley's run, however, we have to talk about Jimmy Jacobs. At this point in Jimmy Jacobs' career, he was coming back into the spotlight after trying to clean up his act from years of substance abuse. Seeing that Jon Moxley was following a similar path filled with vice and violence, Jacobs saw fit to put an end to this dark reflection of himself.
Scars are a story of survival, a story you're starting to live. A story you're kind of familiar with, actually, because I know all about you. You've been homeless, your mother was a hooker, you've got beaten up by drug dealers. You've lived that story too. But Jon, you are not gonna write the final chapter in my story.
The matches in the feud are mostly really enjoyable brawls with a lot of hardcore gimmick stuff as to be expected from these two. I think what makes it stand out so much is just how much character and depth both workers are able to bring to this feud. The themes of the past coming back to haunt us, cycles of pain and addiction, it's all there, and Jacobs and Moxley do well to walk a fine line between emotionally compelling and authentic and melodramatic. I think what I appreciate Mox for most in this feud is how he's able to ground it. While Jacobs goes on this complex emotional journey, Mox is just a straight up bully. He's despicable, and he's such a great heel who can bring the violence to Jimmy Jacobs in ways that Jacobs used to do against others. The crowning achievement of the feud is, of course, the I Quit match from DGUSA Bushido Code of the Warrior 2010. Say that title 10 times fast. It's wonderful, just a tightly paced and executed bloodbath with some of Mox's most vicious moments and some truly clever spots from both men. In this match, Moxley is able to become the worst realization of Jimmy Jacobs' fears, a haunting mirror of where degeneracy and violence can lead you. Moxley plays the perfect maniac to believably goad and push Jacobs into dipping back into the awful tactics he so badly wanted to leave behind in the past. It is easily the best match of Mox's entire indie run and probably still one of the best matches in his entire career. I highly recommend seeking it out, and if you're not convinced yet, head on over to Handwerk Reviews and check out Simon's review of it on there. I'll leave the link in the description below. The last match of note from Moxley's DGUSA Evolve run is his last match on The Independents against Austin Aries. It's a great, simple indie main event without too many layers to it, just a well-worked match that moves at a fast pace. There's a neat little story in there about Moxley trying to steal Aries' moves, but inevitably paying for it. While the last few months of his indie run are marred by demotivation, with this match, Mox does at least go out with a bang. Here's a few things that stand out the most now that I've gone back to see so much of Moxley's work on the independents before signing with the WWE. The first is just how quickly he was able to make it onto the company's radar at a time when they were just starting to really open the doors to talents that made their name on the indies. At around the time that Mox got signed, we would see people like Bryan Danielson, Nigel McGuinness, Low Ki, Tyler Black, and Chris Hero getting signed to the company as well. One look at those names, and Moxley definitely is the one that stands out. All those names I'd mentioned had received real steady buzz for 5 years at the least, and often closer to a decade of time on the indies. While Moxley was certainly around for that long, I don't think he really developed any real significant buzz from the upper tiers of the scene until 2008, and even then, 2010 felt like his first truly significant and great year as a performer. Mox may not be the first case of this kind of rapid ascension through the indies to the WWE, but he certainly feels like he foreshadowed what would become WWE's approach to hiring talent in the late 2010s. Moxley finally developed some real buzz and was on top of several major independents, and then he got snatched up. For us in 2021, it's a familiar story at this point, and it's interesting to see the genesis of that kind of business model with Moxley, of all people. The next thing that stands out so much is just the rapid improvement Moxley made after so many years of just kind of standard, average performances. There's something really encouraging about the idea that a work who's merely fine one day can just find the motivation and the drive to become one of the best wrestlers in the entire world and build a whole career off of that. It's crazy what Moxley was able to accomplish so quickly, just as it seemed that his opportunities were beginning to plateau. Jon Moxley on the independent scene is a story of highs and lows. It's a fascinating study into the evolution of one of the most significant pro wrestlers of the modern era. With a mind for authenticity and realism, it's no wonder that Moxley eventually struck such a chord and translated into one of the biggest stars of the 2010s. That kind of magnetic presence and charisma simply cannot be denied, especially when it's mixed with a dash of that good old ultra-violence. Thank you everybody for reaching the end of the video. Before we get going, I want to send a massive thank you to my editor, SamTheVAMod, who helped me put this video together. Check him out on Twitter at SamTheVAMod. And of course, I want to send a huge thank you to all my supporters on Ko-fi. Thank you to my one-time supporters in Dreamwatch Pro Wrestling, Wolf's Bebop 1, Andrew Perry, Benjamin Emerson, Ryan Acosta, Zach, Emily, and Zavster, and a massive thank you to my monthly Ko-fi supporters in James Draper, Captain Jack Heartless, Eddie Roberts, Jacob Dickens, Matt Brummett, Chick Fritz, Spider in My Bed, Tyler Kuhn Williams, Don Kiger, Arch Stanton, Timothy R. Buchner, In the Lane, Kid Kingpin, Joe Humphreys, Henry, Christopher Jackson, Saltine Daltine, Peter Vinnison, Dustin Faulkner, Edgar Molina, Four Pillars of Hell, Sean Emily, and Mason Rollison. Your guys' support means so much. It's what allows me to be able to bring in help from guys like SamTheVAMod, so you guys are a massive help and contributors to my channel. Thank you everybody for reaching the end of the video. Thank you so much for sticking around. You guys are great. Thank you again, and have a good one.